Hey, what's up? I'm Darkbblue, aiming to help everyone enjoy games in depth. In my previous Elden Ring videos, I've covered many combat mechanics and strategies. However, there's one thing missing: how to craft strategies by yourself. This is the topic of this video. Let's first have a recap of the combat of Elden Ring. There are three major combat styles: interactive combat, buff stacking combat, and controlling combat. There are also two additional factors to consider: special weaknesses of certain enemies and dungeon crawling abilities such as AoE or range attack. So basically, when crafting a strategy, you need to first decide which ones among them you want to focus on. For this goal, I categorize enemies into different situations, where each situation has a different focus of combat style. These situations are my experience that may help you craft your own strategies more easily. Let's start with simpler situations: dungeon crawling against mobs. Mobs are not dangerous individually, but they can work together or with the terrain to become a challenge. As a result, dungeon crawling ability is important in this situation. If it's hard to get close to some enemies, try to grab yourself some range attack. If many enemies are grouped together, AoE attacks can be useful. Some difficult levels can be hacked by making yourself less visible with Assassin's Gambit skill. All in all, consider dungeon crawling ability first for this situation. Elites and field bosses are tougher than mobs in dungeons. Usually, terrain won't be your foe in this case, and most of the challenge is from the enemy itself. If this enemy can be stunned by damage level, you might want to prioritize at controlling combat in your strategy. Clearly, damage level stuns don't need accumulation and is generic and consistent across different New Game Plus and realms, making it very appealing. Then when trying to craft a controlling strategy focusing on damage level, you need to know what staggers can be caused on this enemy by each damage level rank. So you need to experiment and observe with different attack moves and when the enemy is in different states. With enough observation and conclusion, you will know how to control your enemy. If the enemy cannot be staggered by damage level but it has a special weakness, it's a good idea to exploit this weakness as much as possible. We know watchdogs are weak to crystal darts and royal revenants are weak to healing incantations, which are examples of this situation. But it's not enough to just know this weakness. You want to make sure your strategy is generic enough every character with every build can use it. Watchdogs are weak to crystal darts, but how to get many crystal darts in case you have died in a fight and the darts run out? Look up the wiki to acquire related information to make this strategy generic. Revenants are weak to healing incantations, but what if the build doesn't invest into faith at all? Then try to fix this issue by equipping faith bonus gears. With the effort to make it more generic, you can eventually get a beautiful strategy. If neither damage level stuns nor special weaknesses apply to the enemy, it's the worst case of elites and field bosses. In this case, controlling combat might not be a good choice because it's hard to guarantee a stun-based strategy can be applied to all New Game Plus and environments. As a result, you can instead focus on buff stacking or interaction. For buff stacking strategy, first experiment with different skills and movesets to see how to hit this enemy more quickly and easily. Then build your buffs around the best moveset you discover. For interactive strategy, I advise you to make it simple. And actually, I have a definition for being simple here. On one hand, when using this strategy, you should be less likely to make mistakes. To this goal, I tend to use enhanced evading methods instead of the basic dodge rolling. On the other hand, this strategy should rarely require you to distinguish between different attacks. It means you should address different incoming attacks with the same evading method. In this way, you won't be required to put much time into practicing the strategy for a mere elite or field boss. You can save some time for Remembrance bosses. Luckily, the design of elites and field bosses are quite often much simpler than Remembrance bosses, making it easy to craft such simple strategies. For example, all of the attacks from a Falling Star Beast can be addressed with Raptor of the Mists, and all of the attacks from a Magma Worm can be addressed by getting distant to read the move. If you cannot find such simple strategies, try simply using the shield and guard counter. I use shields for both Hippopotamus and Grafted Scion and feels quite simple enough. With the easier situations down, it's time to move to Remembrance bosses. I usually use one of three approaches to strategy crafting in this case. The first one is focusing on buff stacking combat and using interaction and set move in controlling combat as supporting factors. I mentioned the two supporting factors because they can make the strategies crafting much easier. If you want to one-tap a Remembrance boss, it will be very hard. But with the two supporting factors, the DPS threshold for a good strategy is greatly reduced. With much lower DPS, you can still craft stable strategies. So if you intend to focus on buff stacking to craft your strategy, do consider interaction and controlling combat. The second approach focuses on controlling combat, but it requires the boss to possess a special weakness like the Omen Brothers or a lot of set moves like the base game Rodon. If neither is satisfied, it'll be hard to design a stable controlling strategy for a Remembrance boss totally based on stun step. When crafting a strategy around controlling and special weaknesses, stacking some buff will be your ally. It helps reach the HP threshold for set moves more quickly. As a mere supporting factor, it requires much lower DPS than the first approach. For example, the controlling strategy for base game Rodon requires very little buff. The last approach is to focus on interaction, which I believe is the most difficult in most players' perspective. But it is interesting and meaningful, so I will give you a highly detailed explanation with Medora in DLC as an example throughout. Typically, I follow 4 steps to craft an interactive strategy for Remembrance bosses: addressing regular attacks, addressing special attacks, experimenting with special non-iframe evading moves, and trying to make long combos more rewarding. So the first step, addressing regular attacks, is roughly the same as how to craft interactive strategies for elites and field bosses. Basically, you want to find a simple strategy, but we need to acknowledge that the final outcome for Remembrance bosses are likely to be harder. As for Medora, I found that the basic dodge rolling was enough for his regular attacks, but since he's a DLC boss, I also tried some spontaneous guard. I noticed that this boss was specially designed for spontaneous guard. For example, if I dodge roll certain attacks, I won't get a good window for counterattack because Medora moves away from me. However, when spontaneous guarding these attacks, I'll be knocked back, thus staying close to Medora. So clearly, spontaneous guard is a good choice for Medora's regular attacks, but nevertheless, the basic dodge rolling is still useful if I want to try something else. Now that we are able to address all the incoming regular attacks, the next obstacle should be special attacks. They are usually strong attacks triggered at a certain HP threshold. For example, Medora has an opening special attack, a phase transition attack, and a special head explosion spell in his second phase. When dealing with them, long knife frame evading methods, aka Raptor of the Mists and Vow of Indomitable, can be very useful. The opening attack of Medora can be dodged by running straight to his back, requiring no iframe. The phase transition attack is quite hard to dodge with the basic rolling, so I use Raptor of the Mists. Then the head explosion spell can be dodged with Raptor of the Mist as well. With both regular and special attacks being addressed, now I am able to defeat Midora rather stably. So the next two steps are not always necessary. They're only meaningful if you want to get more expert at this boss. The third step is to experiment with all kinds of non-iframe evading methods. You can jump, duck, or run to dodge incoming attacks by staying out of its hitbox without relying on iframes. With these evading methods, in fact, you can be even less likely to make mistakes. For example, the lower half invulnerable window for jumping is much longer than the basic rolling's iframes. In addition to being less likely to make mistakes, these special evading methods also allow you to deal more counterattack damage. Considering both, the third step is important. After some experiments, I noticed a specific slow fast combo of Midora can be jump dodged. His spinning attacks and some fire attacks can also be dodged with jumping or ducking. However, you should note one thing, that knowing an attack can be dodged with such special evading methods doesn't mean you can really perform it in practice. This is because it violates our second principle for crafting a simple interactive strategy. Now you are evading different attacks differently, meaning that you need to distinguish between each attack. So distinguishing attacks is sometimes easy. For example, the stomp attack of Godfrey gives you enough time for distinguishing. But it can sometimes be difficult, such as the case with Midora. This is why I don't immediately use these special evading methods right after I know they are feasible. Instead, I decide to practice them after the final step if I'm still interested in this boss. So the last step is to make long combos more rewarding. I know many people hate bosses doing long combos, for which this step is important. Basically, many bosses in the base game have a much longer counterattack window after long combos. In this case, you don't actually need to make them more rewarding by yourself. In DLC, however, most bosses don't have such a design. A good solution is to use spontaneous guard. Each successful guard in a short time gives you one stack of damage and stun damage buff. As a result, guarding the long combo is naturally more rewarding. Both of the two methods to make long combos more rewarding are quite simple, but we also have a method that's not simple. Now let's try to attack a made the combo. One way to do so is to use Resolve, making your final counterattack deal more damage. The other way is to do a quick rolling attack within a short window. The 5-chain spinning combo of Midora exactly offers such a window. In the end, I've crafted two interactive strategies for Midora. In the first one, I use Spontaneous Guard for regular attacks and Rector of the Mist for some special attacks. I don't use any special non-iframe evading methods, and lastly, I use Resolve and made a combo for higher reward. In the other strategy, I use basic dodge rolling for regular attacks, Steel Raptor of the Mist for special attacks, and a lot of jumping and ducking for specific attacks. I also use quick rolling attacks and made long combos to make them more rewarding. So I hope this example explains how to craft interactive strategies for Remembrance bosses. All in all, I've covered mobs in dungeons, 3 different situations for elites and field bosses, and 3 approaches to Remembrance bosses. So let's make crafting strategies by yourself more accessible. If you want to join me into depths of games, remember to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, see you around.